I don't know how I can top that one. I don't think I can. I was given the opportunity to talk about Donna and deaf history, so that's what I'm going to do as best I can and provide maybe just another facet about Donna the person. First of all, let me say I feel just so very honored to be contributing today to our memory of Donna as a colleague, as a friend, as an historian. You know, Donna thought of herself as a modern Europeanist who specialized in 20th century French history. But her connection to deaf history and disability history came about due to her teaching career at Gallaudet University, America's only college for deaf students, and her research collaboration there on campus with Stan Schuckman. I had a chance to meet some years back, and Stan was a great guy. First, a little context. Donna had been on campus at Gallaudet for a few years when the Deaf President Now movement broke out in 1988. The impact of the student-led protest was to place I. King Jordan, a deaf academic and dean at the school, in the position of university president. And for deaf students at the time, Jordan's eventual selection was path-breaking. Never before had a deaf person run Gallaudet University. For hearing faculty at Gallaudet in the late 1980s, it meant that deaf history would become even more important in the university's curriculum. Donna's connection to deaf history was molded in this transformative period. In the mid to late 1990s, Donna broke new ground in incorporating deaf history into her courses and pursuing her interest in 20th century European history through the lens of disability and deaf history. One key area of investigation was Donna's interest in Holocaust studies and its connection to deaf people. Donna had been working on Holocaust studies since her graduate work at Georgetown University, but the opening of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum encouraged new avenues for historical inquiry, especially as it pertained to the deaf. Between 1993 and 1997, Donna worked with Stan Schuckman to uncover oral histories from deaf people during World War II. This was a painstaking process. One key trip included a visit to Budapest in 1997 to meet with 12 deaf Jewish survivors of the Holocaust. The collection of these personal histories involved the use of multiple sign languages, which is really difficult. I hate to say that. It's very, very hard. Spoken English and spoken Hungarian. Through their interviews, Donna and Stan began to understand the layers of experience of these survivors and how deafness had complicated the strategy for survival during the war. The oral histories collected in Budapest reflected only the initial stage of Donna's deaf history research. The following year, in 1998, she helped to organize the conference, Deaf People in Hitler's Europe, in partnership with the U.S. Holocaust Museum. 4 survivors who were interviewed by Donna and Stan came to the conference in Washington and shared their survivor experiences. These personal recollections, along with presentations from academic researchers on deaf people and the Holocaust, opened up a whole new avenue of inquiry, the nexus of disability studies, deaf history, and Holocaust studies. I think that Donna was really inspired by this research. She was able to meld her expertise in 20th century European history with that of the newer field of disability studies. Donna ended up traveling to 8 European countries and Canada and several cities in the United States from the late 1990s to 2002 in search of deaf witnesses to the Holocaust. I don't think she particularly thought of herself as a pioneer, because I don't know if Donna would have done that, but by looking back at these oral histories and the work she did to publish a collection of material from the 1998 conference, I can't think of a better way to characterize the kind of historical work that Donna was really doing in those days. She really was a pioneer. Donna's more recent work in deaf history was concerned with education reforms during the Popular Front and the Vichy regime. She understood that there had really been no examination of education projects for deaf youth in the 1930s and the 1940s. Donna wanted to study how academic plans by the Popular Front and later the Vichy regime affected deaf children at the Paris Deaf Institute and in other schools for deaf youth throughout the country. This would have been a very fruitful avenue of research, for we really don't know much about how the government tried, either successfully or unsuccessfully, to acculturate deaf children to the national education program. And Donna's expertise gave her the means to work effectively at the Paris Deaf Institute and cull the school's archives for this key information. Unfortunately, this project never came really to fruition, but perhaps another researcher down the road is going to take up this lead that she began. Finally, let me talk briefly about how Donna mentored other colleagues in the field of deaf history and disability history. I met Donna in the early 1990s, but Hines was telling me last night that he thinks that we met in 1988. So maybe my own memory is faulty here. But I wrote here, I met Donna in the early 1990s when Gallaudet University hosted its first international conference on deaf history. By that time, I'd been working for several years, mostly in a very solitary way, on the history and culture of the 19th century French deaf community. And talking to Donna about my research gave me professional support that I could not find elsewhere. Over the years, we participated in a number of Western Society conferences together, and more often than not, she was my commentator. You could always count on Donna to give an incisive list of remarks that would make you step back and question the basis of your research. I really loved her comments. Even though they made a lot more work for me. I really liked her comments. What I valued most about Donna was that she really cared about what other researchers were doing. And if she could help you, she just didn't hesitate to help you. Her generosity of spirit was front and center when she gave me just a whole slew of comments on a manuscript that I published in 2008 on the French deaf community, and I'm indebted to her for everything she did to help me with that. In 2005, the Western meeting in Colorado Springs, let's see, Nashville there, had a panel on disability studies. And the panel consisted of 2 Americanists and 2 Europeanists, and was led by Donna. And it turned out to be a wonderful discussion about a burgeoning field of inquiry and gave us all an opportunity to view our work more broadly and comparatively. And I think that's always really good in history, we can think comparatively. It was really Donna's initiative that got us to think outside the box and personally helped me to approach deaf history with more focus on disability history. One last recollection of Donna's mentoring is in 2009. Donna attended the Deaf History International Conference in Stockholm, Sweden. Vicky was there too, came with Donna. So, you guys took a little trip after the meeting in Stockholm. She brought some graduate students along with her for that trip. They were fascinated with the different presenters and their areas of research. And Donna encouraged them to engage researchers on the program, ask questions, wanted them to be motivated to move ahead in their own work. It was just so classic Donna. Get involved and see what you can learn. In 2011, I was asked to give a presentation of some of my work at Gallaudet University. They've done this a number of times. They've been most gracious to invite me over. In the audience that day, Donna was there. I didn't expect her to be there because she'd heard a lot of the things I had to say already. It was old hat for her. But she came and her presence there gave me moral support. And she really delighted in all the audience's questions, especially the question that you invariably get when you're a hearing person. How can you write about deaf history when you're a hearing person? And I think that Donna had navigated that question on more than one occasion in her life. Had to cope with it, just like the rest of us, to do that. I just want to say today here at the Western, we remember, we celebrate all that Donna meant to us. Her contribution to deaf history and disability history is just a small part of her life. We all know that she loved the study of history. We miss her insights, we miss her friendship, we miss Donna's zest for life. And I can't say more than that. I miss her a lot.
No, I have one of these. Let's see if I can get my technology to work. It's so nice to see you all here, to remember Donna. I arrived on Wednesday. That's a part of her legacy as well. Donna's the one who taught me how to cancel an extra day of classes and make a little mini vacation out of a Western meeting. And I drank more than one glass in her honor last night. It's still hard to arrive at a meeting after 15 months and think that she's not here and that we won't be seeing one another, and enjoying conferences were often one of the few times that we could relax together and talk about intellectual things and enjoy one another's company. It's very hard for me I was asked to talk about Donna as a teacher, and it's very hard for me to limit myself to that. I've already eulogized and memorialized Donna several times in several places, but I'm going to try and focus on that. As her colleague at Gallaudet for 20 years, she was many things to me, not just a teacher. She was a professional colleague in French history, of course. She was a mentor, and I see a clear theme emerging in everything that, all the remarks that are being made today, that this was one of her major roles in life, was mentoring so many of us, both those who know her well and those who didn't. She was a sounding board for me for both teaching and historical ideas. She was a source of moral support at a very complex and difficult institution. She was a travel companion, a dining and drinking companion, a co-conspirator occasionally, and someone with whom I could check reality when the craziness of our institution defied belief, as it often did. And above all, she was a wonderful friend, my best friend in the profession. I had been teaching at Gallaudet. I had been teaching full-time for 6 years when I arrived at Gallaudet, but Donna had already been there for 8. And Donna was my most important source of advice and support as I tried to come to terms with learning and teaching in American Sign Language. And in thinking back upon my experience and Donna's role in it, I've decided that it might be worthwhile to spend a little time talking about that context, because although I know it so well, many of you may not know as much about it or may not know certain important things about it. So let me emphasize the need to say learning and teaching in sign language, because it was back in those days, and Anne knows this as well, a simultaneous process. You learned while you were teaching. After a mere 8 weeks of intensive summer training, maybe you didn't even have that, and then into the classroom without an interpreter. This was possibly the hardest thing I've ever done. I don't know if Donna would call it the hardest thing she ever did, but it certainly was no cakewalk. And I call attention to it because this is the context for all of Donna's remarkable accomplishments as a teacher and a mentor to students in her 28 years at Gallaudet. It's all set against the background of this very unusual institution. So let me elaborate a little more. We need to recall, for some people who may not be aware, that Gallaudet was and remains the only institution of higher education exclusively for deaf and hard of hearing students in the world. At the time Donna started teaching at Gallaudet, ASL had only been recognized as a legitimate language for a very few years. That was starting to be proposed in the early 1960s. It remained, for the most part, uncodified, contested, the subject of intense conflicts over correct and incorrect ways of signing, often centering on how much or how little English influence there was on a particular way of signing or a sign in question. Interestingly, anyone who's knowledgeable about French, the development of modern French culture, will have no trouble recognizing parallels. Education for the deaf, even in the most advanced countries like the United States, had state-supported schools for the deaf around the country, was still often a matter of teaching students to speak and read lips, and then instructing them in spoken language, which they, as often as not, could not understand. The mid-1980s was a time of growing self-awareness and political consciousness for deaf and hard of hearing people in the United States. Thus, to be a hearing teacher at Gallaudet in the mid-1980s, especially one whose sign language skills were not those of a native signer, not to mention a novice signer, was to face problems of a cultural and political nature unlike those in most other institutions of higher education. Some more context. As Anne already mentioned, in 1988, a mere 4 years after Donna arrived at Gallaudet, the university underwent what is in the deaf world referred to as a revolution. Deaf President Now, or DPN, a protest movement of students, alumni, and some faculty, which closed the university, put deaf protesters in the national news, and resulted in the resignation of the newly selected hearing president of Gallaudet. And that person was replaced with the first deaf president of the university, King Jordan, as Anne Quartararo mentioned. This is important for understanding the evolving atmosphere in which Donna taught. After DPN, particularly fervent student and faculty supporters of deaf identity focused on the preservation of deaf, whose essential defining attribute was the use of ASL, including the importance, oh, I'm sorry, I skipped ahead there, whose essential defining attribute was the use of ASL. The militantly deaf felt empowered to question any aspect of university life which did not, in their view, sufficiently privilege ASL, including the importance of grammatically correct English. I could, of course, go on and on and on about these issues and the evolution of the institution ad nauseum, as anyone who's sat next to me at lunch or dinner and made the mistake of asking me a question about Gallaudet knows. But in considering how to talk about Donna's teaching, it occurred to me that while much of this history is very obvious to me, it may be partly or completely unfamiliar, to others. And this is an important part of establishing the environment in which Donna became one of the most respected teachers in the university, sometimes loved and sometimes feared. Every institution has its idiosyncrasies, of course, and I don't mean to suggest that Gallaudet was or is a more difficult place to teach than any other, but surely it is as difficult as any, and one of, if not the most complicated. Thus, when I speak of Donna's accomplishments and her activities as a teacher, advisor, and mentor to students, I want you to recall that behind each of these lies a world of complex identity politics and social relations unlike those I've seen in any other university or college. During the last 20 of the 28 years that Donna taught at Gallaudet, I had the pleasure of having an office down the hall and mostly right next door to hers. I was privileged to team teach many classes with her and to see her teach other classes, and she taught a remarkably wide range of courses. Not terribly unusual in small institutions where one teaches whatever is required. Yet to me, her breadth still seems impressive. I don't believe she ever taught a course in French history, per se, but she taught general European history, covering everything from the French Revolution and Napoleon to the Renaissance and Reformation, the 19th century, the 20th century. She taught world civilization from rocks to rockets, as we sometimes say. She taught U.S. History Survey, both halves of the U.S. History Survey, cultural geography, a course that Ann Butler developed, and a few years ago she developed a new course on geography and the environment. She organized and led study programs for students to Canada, France, Italy, Costa Rica, the Gullah-speaking barrier islands of South Carolina, and Eastern Europe, and that was in connection with the deaf people in Hitler's Europe course. And there are a whole number of other stories that go along with that, which I cannot talk about now. She taught an extremely popular course on Nazi Germany through film. And it's easy now to forget how little respected and accepted teaching serious history through film was not all that long ago. She helped develop a women's studies program at Gallaudet, and she taught and loved teaching the Introduction to Women's Studies class, and unfortunately that program was recently closed. After her work with a colleague studying deaf Holocaust survivors, which has already been mentioned, they developed the course on deaf people in Hitler's Europe, which was again related to the summer course in Eastern Europe. She taught the history of the modern Middle East, which was one of her doctoral fields, and used her knowledge of that part of the world to help instruct the campus about the possible reasons behind the September 11th attacks and to dispel racist and nationalist views of Muslims, Arabs, and other peoples. When one gay student and another perceived as gay were killed on campus in dreadful events in 2000, we helped to develop together an Introduction to Gay and Lesbian Studies course, which I hope helped to support and empower some of the GLBT students on campus. In short, the breadth of Donna's teaching, like her scholarship, was an extension of her intellectual interests, an empathetic yet intellectually rigorous application of history for the better understanding of, and perhaps the betterment of, the world, often through the empowerment of those historically oppressed or denied access to power. This melding of her political awareness and activism with her intellectual interests was at the heart of Donna's approach to students. Here I will draw not only on my own experience teaching with her, but also on testimonials by some of her former students who spoke at an earlier celebration of her life held in Washington last November, for who knew what it was like to be Donna's student better than her students. Donna cared about students so deeply, and she pushed them to achieve, especially when she recognized potential in them. She expected a lot from students, and she let them know it. She could be formidable on the exterior, and she did not tolerate excuses from students, but she was never insincere or disingenuous with them. So they respected her in spite of how tough she was. At the same time, she was always available to them, and some, especially the young women, whose potential for achievement or leadership she hoped to nurture, would sit in her office for hours at a time. I don't know how she did it. She was certainly as busy as I, or any of us, but she never pushed them out the door. Students have said they never once felt like they were unwelcome or being rushed out of her office. She was meticulous and detailed in her reading and criticisms of student work, as she was for the work of her colleagues. One student told of receiving a paper back covered with hundreds of corrections of grammar, spelling, and suggestions for improving her arguments. And she pushed them to achieve beyond their limits, whether self-imposed or otherwise. To one student's tales of a variety of woes and real problems keeping her from completing her work, Donna replied, "I have limited sympathy for you," and told her to just go toughen up and get it done. And still they loved her. I remain forever jealous of this quality. But it was not just grammar and spelling or well-crafted arguments that she sought to impart. It was the meaning of history and how it could be used. Another former student told of receiving a paper back from Donna with pointed criticism of her work, beginning with a short but telling question directed at her subject: who cares? Who cares? And indeed, this was the lesson Donna wanted students most to take from history, that it mattered, that it matters, that if we're asking historical questions about subjects of no consequence, we're asking the wrong questions. What a wonderful sense of the historical enterprise to impart to one's students, to undergraduates. We do history because the answers to the questions we ask matter. Who cares? Donna did. And so did many, many of her students after Donna shared with them that wonderful insight. What a wonderful legacy to have as a teacher of history. Donna was my dear friend, and I'll miss her very much. Thank you.